Right. So, we have processes at Tango Card and, offerings at Tango Card that are very much in the disbursement space. I know there's a lot of companies that have similar challenges around disbursements. And so for us, and I imagine this is true for a lot of organizations out there, you have a process, it begins, it's based on, something that you maybe launched, a product you launched, or, a new offering or a new agreement that you signed. And now you're trying to comply with maybe what agreement you signed, right? So how do you do that? Usually you start off in a place where it's very manual. And so for us, it was very manual. We had somebody spending, approximately 4 days at the beginning of every month just working on the disbursements process to basically make sure we had the records in the right spot, make sure we had the linkage of those records to the right entities, and in this case, in our, ERP system. And then what does that mean? Well, your reporting isn't that consistent. If you're waiting to the beginning of the month every time, what about any accrual that you have within the month, right? So you end up in this place where the reporting is not very consistent. And then ultimately you end up in this spot where, because the reporting isn't consistent and because a lot of this is locked up in spreadsheets and people's brains and emails, it's really not, it's not visible, right? And one of our values at Tango Card is transparency. And this was not a very transparent process. You basically have to go ask the one or two people who were intimately familiar with it or running it in order to get the information about, well, when is this going to go out? And, oh, why didn't my customer get this? Or why does the report show this? And you wouldn't find errors until later in the game, right? Because you're only doing it monthly. So there's a lot of problems, and we experienced many of these leading up to, where we said, hey, this is not going to scale. So, with that in mind, right, we then said, well, what can we do, right? So, okay, we know our problem. Let's now try and build a reliable and repeatable process, right? And so we said, all right, well, starting with a foundation, right? So it always starts with a foundation. So what do you know? How do you know it? Where is it? In this case, we weren't particularly surprised by the answers, right? So like I alluded to in the problem, we had data that was in spreadsheets. We had some things, if anybody's familiar with NetSuite who's listening, right, you're familiar with maybe save searches. Some things were locked up there. Very specific pieces, and the setup process wasn't necessarily ideal. And so what we said is, okay, how do we get the data that's locked up in spreadsheets and people's minds and emails and put it into a structure? So we leveraged, native functionality in NetSuite to build a structure alongside Salesforce so that we could link it end to end, right? So the partner agreement, there's a process there that's in the front office. It then flows through. Ultimately, we get to the point where now we want to, as the customer's completing their onboarding experience or similar, now it goes into NetSuite, right? And then that becomes our source of truth. And then from there, we can do a lot, right? So once we have this structure where we have the visibility now and the consistency, you can now match that up with, right, product transactions. So now there's actions happening in your product. It can be whatever actions would be qualifying, right? In this case, it's based on the agreement. We're looking at transactions and saying, okay, now we're going to make the attribution, and now we can say, all right, on a shorter cadence, right, how do we get that data in? So you have your foundation, you now have your product data. In our case, we have a data warehouse, which is Snowflake. From there, we can do transformation, right? Whatever we need to do. In this case, there's some matching that's going on in order to get it to match with the records and the structure we've created. And then this is where it comes with the cadence and the visibility, right? So because you now have this data, instead of waiting to the end of, in this case, a month, every month, we actually saw an opportunity to do that daily, right? And now this gives better visibility. So if somebody wanted a point in time snapshot, call it mid-month, how are we tracking? That's possible. An account manager can see that, right? So you get more visibility by doing that. And then we're posting those, right? And so now it changes the process at the end of the month. So instead of that being the big event, now it's more of an aggregation, right? Which is really what it should be. The monthly piece has gone from this, massive event where you're scrambling to get all this data, and it's the beginning of the month and you're doing all of your month-end close pieces, which for anybody who's involved in that, there's a lot of work that goes into month-end close or quarter close or year-end close. And so here we said, well, let's make this less of an event. And so we're just aggregating that. And so all of this is posted to NetSuite, and we're able to, from there move forward with that. And so, where do we go from there, right? So what did we actually solve? What was the kind of net of this, right? Well, we're reporting more frequently, right? So instead of monthly, it could be daily. You can do whatever cadence makes sense to you, right? It could be hourly, it could be near real time, or maybe it's weekly. It's whatever makes sense. In this case, daily made sense for us. And then the monthly piece was more of just the actual disbursement. And in doing this work, we created a structure that gave visibility, right? So, we had people in the front office who'd be looking in Salesforce, and they would say, well, I don't see anything here that really is telling me about what we're doing for this partner of ours. What are we actually dispersing? What are the parameters of it? We agreed to something. How do I see that was entered properly? So there's a confidence gap, right? And so here we now have visibility. So whether you're in Salesforce or NetSuite, you see the critical information that's important for your role. And now it's predictable. So instead of folks waiting and having to write in saying, oh, it's the third day of the month, I don't see anything. Now they know that we're on it, right? They know we have a process and they're seeing the result of that process. And that means we have stronger relationships, right? So because we're, able to do this, not only did we take down the 4 days plus of manual effort, which of course, if you extrapolate that with our growth, wouldn't scale, but now it's zero internal effort to do this, and the customer or partner or whatever it is for your use case. In this case, our partner is happier because they're getting that consistently.